Good morning, everybody. Welcome back to your CPS Policy Committee. You will note new time, new day, 9 a.m. on the last Thursday of the month, but we'll save that for later. So thank you so much for being here. As always, we like to do a customary around the horn and introduce to our public who is on this call and who you are seeing. So we'll start with Miss Stephanie Scott. Who are you, Miss Stephanie Scott?
Good morning, everyone. I am Stephanie Scott. I'm the Assistant General Counsel for CPS.
And Miss Stephanie Scott was largely responsible for a lot of the legwork last year that culminated in Policy 2256, the anti-racism policy. So we're happy to have Miss Scott with us in the district. Thanks for being here. We also have, it looks like, Miss O'Connell. Who are you?
I am Tisha O'Connell. I work in the Office of Communications and Engagement as the web editor and interim social media manager.
Awesome. Thanks for being here. Margaret Hall, who are you?
Good morning, everybody. I am Margaret Hall. I am the Director of Student Services at Cincinnati Public Schools.
And Margaret Hall does an awesome job. We're so grateful for you. Thank you, Ms. Hall. And Mr. Jeremy, the man behind the curtain. Who are you?
Good morning, everyone. Jeremy Elihu. I am the Chief Information Officer for the district. And as Mike said, the man behind the scenes for the technology moderating for you this morning.
All right. Thank you, sir. Thanks for the moderation. You got somebody else behind that curtain with you. Who's Rob Wilson? Who is that guy?
Hey, Mike. Good to see you, buddy. Rob Wilson, just another moderator in tech support. And kudos on your 7 days of half marathons, by the way.
Thanks. Yeah, 7 days today. I snuck a marathon in there, though. Thanks, Rob. I appreciate it. We also have Mr. Dan Hoying.
Good morning, Dan Hoying, General Counsel.
And we definitely, one of the most important people that I know the board works with, Miss Pat Bruckner. Who are you and what do you do?
Good morning, I'm Pat Bruckner. I'm secretary to the board members, work in the board office. Take the minutes.
Thanks for everything you do, Pat. I know it's been overdrive these past few months too, so we appreciate you.
Thank you.
Then my one of my esteemed colleagues, Miss Bolton.
Hello, how are you all? And I'm Eve Fulton, and I'm a member of the Cincinnati School Board.
And it's awesome to be back on a committee. Every committee I was on for my first couple of years, I was on with Miss Bolton. Last year, I was not on any committees with Miss Bolton, and now we're back. So you know, trouble will ensue. So we have a third board member who will join us soon, Mr. Ben Lindy. I'm Mike Morosky, acting policy chair, and now I'll step back for agenda item number 1. Now I'm not policy chair, and we need to pick a new chair. And we have a quorum, so we can do that. Are there any nominations? Ms. Bolton.
Mr. Chair, I nominate member Mike Morosky.
Well, thank you, Ms. Bolton. And I don't have any other nominations. I will accept that gracious nomination. And Dan, to the best of my knowledge, we do not, nor can we do any kind of roll call vote, so we're good to go, right?
Yeah, I think
cool.
We're all set.
Well, I'm honored. I truly am. As Ms. Bolton knows and the people in this call, I really, really like policy. I'm really grateful to have Ms. Bolton here because I know that she has been on this committee before. Sometimes, I don't want to say against her will, but I was like, oh, come on, we're going to do this. It's going to be fun. And so it's great to have Ms. Bolton here. Last year, some of you on this call I see in the public will recall when we did OTES 2.0, the Ohio Teacher Evaluation System, and Ms. Bolton was really instrumental in getting that to the point that it was when we approved it. So now she's here officially, excited to see what we're going to do together. Agenda item number 2, approval of the 2021 meeting schedule. So the meeting schedule, as I noted, except for November and December, so I'll give you those dates right now. We will meet the last Thursday of the month from 9 to 10:30 a.m. In November, we will meet on, give me 1 second. Thursday. No, it's not Thursday. Hold on. Pat, do you have that in front of you?
November 18th and
Okay,
December 16th.
At the same time, right?
Yes, at 9 a.m.
See, I wasn't kidding when I said how important Pat was. Thanks, Pat. Unless that doesn't work for you, Ms. Bolton, I know you, me, and Ben Lindy had agreed that was fine, but we want to get that on the record. Does that work for everybody here and for the general counsel office?
Yes, it's the same day as finance, but finance doesn't meet until 4, so that's fine.
Okay. Great. All right. So moving right along, we're already an effective committee. So this committee, one of the jobs we are tasked with for those new to this is reviewing our current policies and updating them. And as I say this, I realize, Dan Hoying and Eve, I have to apologize because I realize I did not give people the opportunity to sign up for a hearing of the public at the end. I got kind of excited to be on a committee again with Ms. Bolton and to see all my friends, and we dove right in. So I'm going to pause, if that's okay, and read our little script here, because if you would like to be heard, you need to sign up now. And the instructions are this. To speak, you will need to send a request by clicking on the hand icon on your screen. Mac and iPad users are able to access the raise hand icon located on your device. Once the request has been granted by Mr. Hoying, you will receive a notice on your screen. Click yes to go interactive. If you don't want your video active, you have to have your video active, and we're going to ask that you also state your name, your school affiliation, and the topic on which you would like to speak. And you'll have 2 minutes to speak. So again, click the hand raise icon between now and the next 10 minutes. So by 9:20, let's say, Mr. Hoying will log that you would like to speak, and you'll have to state again your name, your school affiliation, what you're here to talk about, and we ask that you have your video screen on in keeping with our standard protocol for board meetings when we are able to meet in person. So I think that covers it. Good, Dan? Okay. So moving back in, Ms. Bolton?
Mr. Lindy needs someone to forward him the link. He is in a different office.
I can do it right now. I'll
Thank
forward
you,
it
Mr.
to him.
Hoying.
I'll forward it to him by email if you want to let him know.
Great.
Okay. Awesome. So as I was saying, before I went back to read the script, one of the tasks of this committee is to consistently review our current policies. We have a number of them, and we do them on a cycle of about, what is it, Dan, 7 years? We like to make sure, that if a policy hasn't been looked at in 7 years, it needs to be updated. For example, last year, we did a lot with our technology policies, because technology, while always important, became very relevant and continues to be relevant in this world of COVID. There were many instances where we referred to BlackBerries. Nobody on this committee knows what those are, so we had to excise the term BlackBerry from our policies, for example, to make them updated. That's not entirely serious, but you get my drift. We need to keep these policies updated and in the now, particularly when we pass something like the equity policy that was passed years ago, or the anti-racism policy that are so important. We want those reflected elsewhere. So Dan, I don't know if we have any today. I kind of just wanted to start off the year with that. Do you have any that you would like us to look at today, or will we wait till next month and continue the cycle?
In terms of our regular cycle?
Yep.
Yeah, so actually, in terms of an agenda today, I know you've got therapy dogs on there. So with us, we've got Margaret, and I believe Terry Coney may or may not be joining us if she can. And we sent some info out about our current policy on animals in schools. Second, sort of a timely issue. We've got Tisha O'Connell here from Public Affairs to talk about the social media policy. We've got some recommendations for that policy. And then in terms of our regular review, we've looked at, we are nearly done with the 7,000 series. We were a little bit interrupted last year in reviewing the property series. That's the 7,000 series of policies. So there's about a half dozen policies that we looked at, don't necessarily need any changes, one or two that I am recommending changes on. So the 7,000 series is what we proposed for today. Thereafter, we've got a few more in the 7,000 series, and then I think up to the committee where we want to go from here, but the human resources policies haven't been looked at in some time. So that would be our proposal in terms of the cycle where we would go from here.
Hi, everybody. I just wanted to say hello, and then I'm sorry for being late. For some reason, I checked all my usual places and couldn't find the meeting link. But Stephanie, it's nice to meet you or work with you, and thanks for including me. I can't hear Mike. Can you guys hear Mike?
He's muted.
Could you introduce yourself to everybody? I know who you are. Could you introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm part of the Mike Morawski fans club, and he was nice in the meeting. My name's Ben Lindy, and I'm the newest board member for CPS, and this is my first time on the policy committee.
That's great. So yeah, we have a new policy committee. I stayed on, and now we have Mr. Lindy and Ms. Bolton, so it's exciting. We're excited for a good year. So I would just like to, my first question to the committee members is what Mr. Hoying laid out regarding, and we'll kind of go with the therapy dog piece, social media, and 7,000. But going to HR next, I'd love some feedback from y'all. Does that sound all right as far as our next round of policies to review? To Eve and Ben. Ms. Bolton?
Yes, I think that's a good series to go with. And I also, at the end of the meeting, or we get to other, as I think I've mentioned, I'd also like to propose not necessarily a series, but a way that policy committee can be used to help in sort of this, our efforts of re-envisioning what the next CPS looks like. But I think going with the HR series is a great idea and needed.
And actually, I think this is actually the best time to talk about that, Ms. Bolton. If you want to continue with your piece about, how can policy committee be part and parcel of the new CPS and reviewing our policy. So if you want to talk about that now, I think that might make sense because we're talking about our work plan right now anyway. So.
Oh, okay, great. I'll make it as short as I can. It has a little bit of a context to it. As the board is always struggling to make sure it's providing its role or playing its role and not necessarily so interfering with the administration's role or what have you. And as the whole board and the whole school community is trying to re-envision what that new normal is, but more particularly the next CPS or the new CPS into the future, because we've been so impacted, if you will, not only by COVID, but also by increased community involvement over the last several years and facing so many operational issues that the superintendent sort of redesigning the infrastructure of the district. One of the things I would propose is that we have, and Dan can correct me, I think we've got at least, and Stephanie probably can too, we have like 300 policies or so, but the vast majority of these 300 or more policies really are about the board establishing parameters for what the administration and what the staff and what the district is supposed to be doing. There really are, out of that 300, and I've only done a superficial perusal, so I don't think I know it's not in-depth or extensive, but out of that there might be 20, maybe even 50 policies that actually direct what we should be doing. And I'm not talking only about our bylaws, but talking in terms of the equity policy or the anti-racism policy or the equal access or the approval of courses of study. Those things actually help direct what the board's supposed to be doing. And I just think it would be great for us to kind of create a list of that to help us envision what not only our role in the next CPS should be, but also to help define what that next CPS is. So I sent a list of maybe a little bit less than 20 to, I think, committee members, and I think Mr. Hoyne as well, just as examples. But I just think it would be a really good effort to defining who we are as a board and certainly as a policy committee, but also to keep us in that higher level of concern, because it's so easy, and people call it the getting in the weeds. It's not that, but we have to look at specific things. But if we could stay in the bigger picture, I think that would help everyone, especially to move the district along. So I'd suggest somewhere as we pursue this that maybe an assignment later on to general counsel and assistant counsel to look at that, or members to look at it. It is kind of fascinating how many are very specific about what others are supposed to be doing based upon our policy versus what it is that we as a board are supposed to be doing. And it was it just was a way I like to try to get at this new phase that we are trying to enter during difficult times, and hoping for a brighter future at this point in time.
I love it. I have a couple comments, but I'm going to go to Mr. Lindy if you have any response, or Mr. Hoying or Stephanie. Scott.
Let me throw in a quick thought, which is I wanted to ask at some point in the beginning of the meeting, and I feel like we're getting too many of these things, but just to hear from you all in like a minute, if you had to describe the overall scope of the responsibilities of the policy committee. I just wanted to make sure I had, like, at the highest level, what are we up to? What are we trying to accomplish? I've kind of inferred some of that, but to hear if that could come out in our first couple minutes, that'd be great.
Sure. Oh, yeah. Real quick, I would say, the policy committee traditionally has been tasked with ensuring that the policies governing the district are creating the best environment possible for our kids, our staff, and everybody we're working within the district, that we give people the parameters in which they can create the best opportunity for kids to learn. Part of that, pragmatically is, like I said, reviewing policies that have not been touched, say in 7 years. We need to keep everything up to date. That's sort of just the day-to-day work. We need to make sure our policies are relevant and they're up to date. Every now and then an opportunity may present itself to do something huge, like equity policy, anti-racism policy. And then there are opportunities where there's maybe a crisis that needs to react to, like COVID, where we need to look at our last year. You'll recall we had a ton of resolutions updating policies regarding electronic devices, right, that were coming out of this committee. So broadly speaking, make sure that the ship is sailing, that it has everything that it needs, that it has the wind and the sails and the infrastructure to move, and that it's providing those guardrails that are focused on equity and learning, and then also responding to kind of the now and being innovative at times. And Ms. Bates will remind us, which I think is right, that a lot of our work will come from the board and be assigned to us periodically. Our committee work is full board work down here. That's not to say that we can't be innovative and follow up on Ms. Bolton's suggestion, for example. But I'll pause before I get too philosophical. So that's how I see it, at least.
Yeah. One follow-up question?
Yep.
Do we do any monitoring of whether policies are being followed?
So I think that's where I'm not going to speak for Ms. Bolton. I'm not that dumb, so I'll kick it to Ms. Bolton. But I feel like that's partly at the heart of what she's talking about, in the sense that the administration, we have the policy, the administration creates procedures, and then there's the checks and balances there. As far as, like, does this committee look at, there are a couple policies that have that language in it, so equity and anti-racism, for example, but like with the 300 policies, I say we follow it when it comes up. For example, property. Dan's talking about Series 7000. We have a lot of policies about property, and they may not be relevant until it's relevant. And then when it is, that's kind of the checks and balances, if that makes sense. But I also think that what Ms. Bolton's talking about is interesting, because it what I think you're talking about is creating policies that are about us and how we behave, in which sense we could, kind of audit that a little easier. So I don't know if that's helpful. I don't know if Mr. Hoying, I'm looking at you too, if you want to help answer Ben's question regarding do we, and then I'll go to Ms. Bolton first and then Mr. Hoying.
I think Mr. Lindy's question, especially about monitoring, is very, very important. And that always, over the dozen years I've been on the board, that always has been an issue. And that's why we've been so glad about this periodic review and that rotation. I think that's been very helpful. I will also say that the monitoring of policies has really been improved with the arrival of Superintendent Mitchell, largely because when she became superintendent, she was aware that the board really was focusing on policy, and that she then ordered within the administration a complete review of all policies, particularly as it pertained to how does this policy relate to, let's say, the board's equity policy. I'm sure that kind of review internally will probably be happening regarding the anti-racism piece as well. We have had any number of decades, I think, where there were policies and then there were administrative guidelines, but maybe the guidelines weren't published, or maybe we weren't monitoring how faithful everybody was being to the policy. So it's a different culture in the last couple of years of that should be a role in part. Where you usually find that monitoring, though, is probably going to be in the other committees that have responsibility for student achievement or health and safety or finance. That's where that initial, or the board itself or the community brings to us that issue that, hey, you've got this policy, why aren't you following it? So I think that is a role for us to play, and I think there's been tremendous growth. And the policy piece that Mike brings up is so right. He complete correct summary. But one of the things I would only add is that with the policies, this is primarily the board is a policy making agent. And so us being good about this is our primary responsibility, besides finding enough money that we can deliver a good education. I mean, those are two of the big ones. So I think the monitoring is going to be happening, and it certainly has been happening. And I've really enjoyed the fact that the superintendent recognizes that board establishes policy and the administration carries it out, and the degree to they do that with fidelity. As long as our policies are good, then we're in pretty good shape, because our policies should reflect community interest and community values and engagement.
Dan, do you have anything to add to that or not?
Just a couple of things. I completely agree that there's been a re-emphasis on the application and enforcement of policies since Superintendent Mitchell took over. One of the first assignments she gave to the leadership team was to write procedure for each and every policy that's out there, and so those procedures were reevaluated as well. Many procedures were already in place, but making sure that everyone had a solid understanding of the policies that applied to their area. I think one of the purposes of the policies is for the board to set its direction for the district. A second reason, and I did a PowerPoint on this I don't know, maybe 2 years ago. The community also gets involved. So we've had policies. I'll use the example of like the smoking policy, where there were community members who came to the board and expressed an interest in, and really it was a very community-driven process to update those policies. And then the third thing I think is sort of communicating what laws apply to us as well. Ms. Bolton has been very good about attending the OSBA conference sessions on kind of annual updates to policies. And a lot of times that's not necessarily the board's will or the community's will, it's just what the law is. You'll see that in the 7,000 series that we reviewed today relating to the disposition of property. I don't think anybody on the board or who's a big fan of public schools, thinks that some of the rules that apply to the disposition of property, like offering it to community schools first, charter schools first, is necessarily, the board's direction, but it's the law. And so it's a good, having the policies up to date and is a good way of communicating and making sure people are aware what rules apply to us. So that's the only thing I'd add.
Yeah.
Mike, can I just add one thing in flavor of both previous boards and also in support of our staff and the administration? Some years, most school boards contract out their policy writing to a firm called Neola, and there's other firms that do it as well. And basically, they're all good. They're in keeping with the law, and they're basically boilerplate. Some years ago, and I think this is all, again, as Dan just mentioned, part of the re-engagement of the community with this school district. Some years ago, we got rid of Neola, and we continued then to do it ourselves with tremendous staff effort. That's unusual, and that also was a sign, 7 years or so ago, maybe longer, when we had decided that we are independent of other people's boilerplate.
Ben, does that help? Then we're going to move on.
Yeah, it does. I mean, I have I will share an early thought on this, which is that to the extent that this is influenceable, one thing I was excited that we might try, and I want to know, this is my first meeting, so I want to learn more about how things work, and maybe this is a bad idea, but one incoming thought was, could we as a group do some prioritization and say, given where we are as a district, given what's happening in the world, given what we want to be true for kids over the next 6 months to a year, within that 300, are there 5 that are particularly important? And then could part of what we do as a committee be some auditing or some reporting or some accountability around, like, let's do some checking in various places to see, when it comes to end users, like kids, parents, staff, like, are these things that we say in writing should happen, are they actually happening? And like, are there lessons we can learn, things we can celebrate, areas we can improve? I wanted to offer that, but Mike, I don't want to, like, wherever you want to sequence that in the set of things we have to accomplish, whether that's in this meeting, a future meeting, I defer to you.
Yeah, I think it's a sound idea, and I think we begun that work last year when we went back through the policies that were exceptionally relevant to this COVID time. We may have stopped just shy of doing this sort of intensive audit that I'm hearing you talk about. But what I would encourage you to do, and what I would welcome as chair of this committee, is if you wanted to go look at the different series and pick these 5 or 6 and bring them to the next meeting in February, and we'll put it on the agenda and we can look at, you can present it. Here are these I think are relevant, and then figure out, what does it mean to audit them, without adding too much extra on whether it's Mr. Hoying, Ms. Scott, superintendent, et cetera. I think that makes sense. And again, we did that last year. I would say, and I'm proud of the committee's work last year, because I feel like 90% of it was proactive. There were maybe 10% reactive, like, oh man, we need to really check these out now. So yeah, I'd welcome that, Ben. I think that makes sense.
That's great. Let me do it, Mike. I appreciate the time, and yeah. I'll circle.
Cool. And then Mr. Hoying or Ms. Scott, if you could shoot Ben, if he doesn't already have it, the handy dandy link to all our policies, and then they're all right there, Ben. And if you're a nerd like me, you may just go look at them when you're bored and try and find opportunities to improve. All right. So, Ms. Bolton, my sort of comments, I like what you're saying, and I think it makes sense. And it is interesting that out of our 300, you said 50 sort of govern our work. I think that might be generous. I do think it makes sense while we are moving into this new CPS, the district will never look the same, that our policies also don't have to look the same. And so, Mr. Hoying, do you have any questions for Ms. Bolton and what she was talking about before we went and the other route? Did it make sense?
Yeah, it does make sense.
Okay. So, and then one last question, and we'll move on to back to the agenda proper. So, Ms. Bolton, so for like a next step, so February we already have Ms. Bruckner. I know you're listening. We have an agenda item. Mr. Lindy will have space on the agenda, and for February, Ms. Bolton, what would you like to see happen next then as we move forward with this kind of, renewed policy focus?
In many ways, it possibly could dovetail to what Member Lindy is suggesting too, because there might be some major overlap, certainly.
Yeah.
I would just say if it's possible, again, I'm not asking anybody to read all 300 and some of these things necessarily, but at least by the next month, be able to come back with maybe some nominations as to examples of those policies that kind of control us versus us trying to control what the administration or others are doing. And those examples might lead us then to help come up with maybe a definition of what it is that we're looking for. It might be one of those things where examples lead us to determine, and many of them, as I have found out, are really about what kind of district do we want.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the policies actually, as you look at them, are us writing stuff that is our view and what the law and the Constitution, is to Dan's point, makes us do. But it's really kind of envisioning what the district should look like. So I think that's why it can have an impact on our work as well as helping the larger board come up with this next CPS. So I guess if we all take a chance and start looking at them at our convenience under all these circumstances we're living, I appreciate some examples, and then we can maybe have a discussion about some of those examples of policies.
That's great. I think that's a sound suggestion. And then if Mr. Hoying and Ms. Scott maybe want to join us in that effort, find a few examples to Ms. Bolton's point of policies, that govern us, policies that govern administration or PLT, and we can put some time on the agenda in February, Ms. Bruckner, to talk about that. So I think that's great. Are there any questions, closing comments before we move into back to the agenda proper? Great. So, Mr. Hoying, why don't we, if it's cool with you, so we have the few things teed up, can we just move right into the 7,000 and knock those out, and then head on over to therapy dogs, and then I know there was another thing you said, but we'll start with 7,000.
Yeah, the other is social media policy.
Got it. Cool. Yeah. Okay.
So, I think we can move quickly through these. Again, this is sort of cleanup on finishing up the 7,000 series. We reviewed much of the 7,000 series last year. I'm going to share my screen so that those who do not have the policies in front of them can see what we're talking about. First, the 7,000 series here, we've got 7,100 facilities planning. This is a pretty generic policy that relates to, our I would say, commitment to providing excellent facilities planning and facilities throughout the district. Again, we reviewed it. I don't have any recommended changes. I'm glad to answer your questions on it. And just so, again, for the new committee members so that they know, you'll see the last time this was revised or reviewed was July 8, 2013. That always starts to make me nervous because a lot has changed in 7 years. So what we will do after the committee has reviewed it is, throw another line up there that says essentially last reviewed January 28, 2021. And, at least the committee has had a chance to look at it and make sure that these are kept up to date. So I'm glad to answer any questions, but this is Board Policy 7100.
And no suggestions from council as far as updating, and none from me either. And so for Mr. Lindy, I know Ms. Bolton knows this. The way this kind of works is then, if you've had an opportunity to look at it and you have additions, subtractions, now's the time to state them, or questions. And then if not, we as a committee can, if we so choose, recommend that these move to the full board for passage via resolution at our next business meeting. So I'll give you.
Just one point on that. For reviewed policies, we typically don't have the full board take action. We just note in here that the committee reviewed it on 128. For any changes, amendments, additions of policies, deletions of policies, those we present a separate resolution for everyone to the full board, and that's for their consideration.
Thanks for the clarity. That's right. So any from my colleagues, any comments about this policy?
Yeah, I have one, Mike.
Yep.
Have we thought about doing any, at least doing is probably the wrong word. Have we looked at exploring any prevailing wage ideas around facilities as a CPS policy?
Oh, yeah.
Say more about that.
It just seems like there is, I know the city has tried some things, particularly around the crime lab with these community service agreements as ways to work for like prevailing wage for workers who are working on construction projects. I'm not an expert on that history. I know there's some state law that makes school construction projects different in Ohio, but it struck me that that could be a really important issue, and I was curious what conversations people had about it in the past.
We're not allowed to. I'll let Mr. Hoying talk about that. That's kind of out our control. It's a little interesting, strange loophole. I saw Ms. Bolton, so if you want to comment first, Ms. Bolton, go ahead.
Can I clarify one thing before?
Yeah.
I'm aware of the state law prohibition. I think what was interesting to me was some other, there can be, I think, some thoughtful and creative workarounds through, I'm going to get the name of them wrong. I apologize. I want to say community service agreements, but it's not quite the right term. But I was curious if that's a topic that's come up in this context.
Ms. Bolton?
Yes, we've dealt with prevailing wage before. We've dealt with the community agreements, as recently as with FC on community agreements and what have you. I think Mr. Hoying can speak to the legality of it. I would say in this planning piece, just real quickly, just a question I have is about community involvement in the planning, and also the word campus, so to speak, as something to be thinking about in that planning. But Mr. Hoying can brief us on the how we have done some workarounds in transferring of property and whatever. So
project labor agreement was the term I was trying to come up with.
Oh yeah, we've lived through many. Or several. Yes, rightfully so.
I think Board Member Morawski summarized it pretty well. That there was a time when it is. I think it's always been the case that school districts don't have to follow or are not required to follow the prevailing wage statutes that apply to other public entities in the state. But the legislature actually went further because school facilities projects often involve co-funding by the state. That they prohibited school districts from voluntarily entering into straight prevailing wage agreements. And that's in Ohio Revised Code. There are certainly other forms of agreements, and as Ms. Bolton said, we've used them as recently as FC Cincinnati and other projects. I tend to think we have a pretty good reputation in this sphere. I think our current facilities kind of director, Robin Brandon, is outstanding at making sure that we've got good community input, not only on the project and the design of the project, but also who's going to perform the work for the project. So I think we have an excellent reputation here. But yeah, we've used those in the past.
Mr. Chair, could I add just that one of the reasons that law was passed, reflecting obviously a business community and a few other folks, but is because we did so much of our facilities master plan at prevailing wage. And so I think that that's something we can be proud of. But back only to this policy, I'm interested in the word campus being there, and I'm interested in community involvement somehow regarding our facilities planning.
So I will take that back to General Counsel. Dan, if you have those notes, that looks good. We can add that language and bring it back in February and see what that looks like. And if it looks good, then Ms. Bolton will pass it on to the board. But before we move on, Mr. Lindy, are you good at this time with your question after the explanation and conversation? Do you have any follow-up?
At this time, I think I'm good. We're going to talk about this again in February.
Yeah, with this policy, it'll come back. Yeah.
Awesome. I appreciate it. Thanks.
Appreciate it. Yeah, appreciate you. Mr. Hoying, what's next?
Great. So our next policy that we'll look at is Board Policy 7230.01. This relates to the law surrounding donations of buildings and grounds. And we have no recommended changes. I think I can get all the language on the screen. There's some law. I should be careful here. Some of this is required by law, and I believe the bullets there, the potential gift or donation shall contribute to an improvement that will, quote, support the mission and vision of CPS, increase the involvement of the community in supporting CPS to achieve its strategic objectives, and support academic achievement and or enhance the operational, aesthetic, environmental of the school. When I look at this policy, I'm reminded of, it may seem that like you would always accept a donation, right, as a school district. We would welcome donations. There are times, especially in the real estate sphere, where a donation, it would add to the cost of the school district to maintain it, and frankly, like not contribute to the mission. So, specifying that we of course welcome and are grateful for donations of property and real property, but as long as it is supporting that mission. So I have no recommended changes to this policy either.
I'll kick it to my colleagues for questions, comments. Ms. Bolton?
Just one that's come up in a couple of other boards on which I serve. And one is that, and I think this is something that Member Messer has mentioned often about whoever contributes to us or whatever, are they somehow in keeping with the values that CPS stands for? And I don't know if that is taken care of with the mission and the vision piece, but I know it's on at least the two boards I serve on besides this, or two of the three, at least one of those boards has turned down a major contribution because the board didn't want to be associated with a particular group or what have you. I just didn't know if that can work in there neatly or nicely, or if Mr. Hoyne and Ms. Scott, if you think that somehow that the vision mission piece works. I don't want to fight about it or push it, but I do know that's coming up a lot because there's a lot of people giving some significant money in order to repair their own public relations.
I think, this kind of harkens back to what I was talking about before when Mr. Lindy asked about the purpose of the policy committee. I think, similarly to how we included policy 2256 and 55, anti-racism and equity respectively, in the social media policy language, I think, that could be, pertinent too, i.e., not accepting donations from individuals, organizations that are in direct contradiction to policy number 55, 56, et cetera. I don't know if this is the right place for that either. So I would ask, like you did, the council, if that may be something we could do. I think it makes us a little stronger. I will say I need to put in a plug for Dan's comment. I 1,000% agree with Dan. Having been a former executive director of a nonprofit, not all donations are good. Sometimes donations create more work, cost more money, 100%. So with that suggestion, unless council thinks this is the wrong place for it, I would recommend that we include some sort of language and then bring this back in February. Does this
Perfect.
seem like the right place? Okay. Ben, I saw you pop up on the screen. Would you like to any comments on this particular one?
No, I'm good. Thank you very much.
No problem. All right, Dan. Ms. Bolton, if you're good, you good? All right. Well, we'll move on, Mr. Hoying.
Got it. And I apologize. I thought I was sharing my screen there for folks to see. So I'll share again here as we move on to next policy, which is, okay, so this is actually a series of 3 policies. 7240 is site acquisition. 7300 is disposition and acquisition of real property. And then if we go down to 7312, that talks about the disposition of surplus buildings and grounds. I'm recommending that the language that is in 7240 acquisition and the language that is in 7312 disposition is already included verbatim in 7300, which is frankly a combination of those 2 policies. So again, this is sort of this is our process of making sure our policies make sense and that they're internally consistent and that they're not duplicative. So my recommendation here is that the committee rescind 7240 and 7312, and I'll show you 7300 on the screen, which already includes, again, both those policies in full. And I've made a few changes that I recommend. First, the title says that it's the disposition and acquisition of real property, personal property. This policy actually doesn't. Personal property are goods. And this policy, I don't think, addresses personal property. So I'm recommending a change to the name. Again, this first section is verbatim one of the policies that I'm recommending rescinding relating to the acquisition of real property. Second talks about disposition, and again, this includes language from that other policy, but I'm recommending that it be updated. This reflects the current law in terms of what the school district has to do when it disposes of real property, meaning it sells or real property. It is a step-by-step process. We can't, even though we're a corporate entity and everything else, we are not allowed to just go out and sell real property. We're not a real estate land. Instead, we have to first offer it to community schools that are operating within, they get essentially a right of first refusal. And then secondly, we have to offer it up for auction. And then third, if even the auction is unsuccessful, then we're allowed to engage in a private sale. There are some exceptions that relate to exchanges of property, but very specific rules in terms of what the district has to do when it disposes of real property. It's to prevent, the superintendent from selling off school district land to her nephew, or the general counsel, finding a good piece of land and selling it to his brother-in-law or something like that. That's the purpose, as well as I think, some rules relating to selling to charter schools. In any event, with those updates, I'm recommending adoption of this policy as well as the rescission of those other 2 policies. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Appreciate it, Dan. Questions from the committee members?
None here.
None from Mr. Lindy. Ms. Bolton?
Yes, I totally agree with General Counsel's recommendation, and I would only suggest that in the procedures or guidelines, somehow dealing with what you just mentioned regarding like a conflict of interest, but it should pertain to board members as well as administration. this gets very weird on property when board members are, how shall I say it, involved with maybe a conversation with others about property. So just a point of issue about guidelines somehow pertaining to the code of ethics for board members.
And I think,
not in the policy, but somehow in the guides.
I think that speaks well to your initial sort of opening salvo and suggestion regarding our work. Anyway, does that make sense, Mr. Hoying?
Yeah, so what I gather, but I want to make sure that is to move forward with the rescission of both the other policies, move forward with the adoption of these changes to 7300, and to ensure that the guidelines, the procedures include Ms. Bolton's recommendation.
Yep, that's right. Great, so we can move forward with this one and put it on the February 8th agenda, it sounds like, and the rescission of the other two. Great, all right.
Two others that, again, I have no recommended changes, but 7310 relates to the disposition of surplus property that is not real estate. So this relates to personal property, to goods. Essentially, it describes what the school district can do with, let's see. Sorry, this is 7312 still. Excuse me. Surplus property. 7310 relates to goods. This says what we should do with instructional material that's no longer current, equipment, sort of the process for mothballing, if you will, equipment, and what we can do with disposing of the property. Essentially, this reflects, I shouldn't say essentially, it reflects what is in the Ohio Revised Code in terms of what we should do with personal property that is goods that are no longer current or relevant or usable. I'm glad to answer any questions, but I don't have any recommendations.
Questions from my colleagues? Nope. Me neither. So cool. We can mark that one as reviewed.
Okay, and then the last one is 7410, which relates to maintenance of property. Again, a lot of state law involved here, and actually even more because many of the facilities master plan projects, all of the facilities master plan projects were co-funded by the state, which then puts additional requirements on the district to maintain maintenance funds to continue to maintain the properties that the state helped to build. So the state doesn't want to participate in funding the building of a new school and then see that school just go to its demise because of lack of maintenance. And so all of those state-funded projects require essentially continued maintenance financing and funding for the building. So this policy includes what's required by state law, but it's frankly even more specific when we've accepted state funds to improve our buildings. That's the maintenance policy. I don't have any recommended changes. Glad to answer your questions.
Mr. Linney, Ms. Bolton? Ms. Bolton.
And actually we have to reserve a certain amount of money in order to do this. I think that's part of the budget piece from the FMP. I just have this kind of 3 words and see if Dan or Stephanie that you think they're already taken care of. But I'm just interested in on the maintenance one, including anything about water quality, technology, and again using the word campus. I think the board's very much ready for a major initiative in outdoor education and environmental education, and so that's the campus piece plus the technology. I don't know if that's such a big investment for us. Maybe it's already covered there, but the water quality continues to kind of, no pun intended, surface. It seems like every other year, so that might be something to add. But it's an important policy.
Yeah.
I think Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, if it makes sense, I can propose some language and bring that back in February also.
Sounds great. I like where this is going, Ms. Bolton. A lot of these minor changes are actually quite significant, and it's helping me to think uh, differently about our review of these policies as we move forward with the new CPS. So I just wanted to say I appreciate it because these seem like small changes, adding one word like campus, for example, but it's significant. Great. Mr. Lynn, do you have any questions about this one?
I do not.
Great. Okay, so let's move on to if that's the continued review is finished, correct, Dan?
That's the 7,000 series. Yes, thank you.
All right. Congrats, everybody. Good first meeting. So if it's all the same, I would love to talk about the therapy dog piece, and I just want to give a little intro if that's okay. A young woman named Rhea, who is actually watching the meeting right now because this is part of her school assignment. As we all know, Clark Montessori seniors have a senior project, and they advocate. I'm meeting with a young woman about maternal health, actually, next week. But Rhea had reached out to chat about therapy dogs, and I thought the conversation was interesting enough to include it on the agenda for a couple of reasons. The main reason being our students, many of our students experience trauma daily, and we do our best in our schools through the PBIS, Positive Behavior Intervention Support work with Susan Bunty, Margaret Hall with Student Services. If I may, with our Mind Peace partnerships, we do a pretty good job, and I would say we have put forth more resources than just about any other urban district in the state to make sure that we do provide that healthy environment for our kids. Obviously, trauma has been compounded with this COVID, and I thought that Rhea's suggestion of therapy dogs was timely. A quick perusal of our policies showed me I didn't see much about the animals in school. I mean, there are, but I didn't see anything super specific to this, and I'm certainly not proposing we have dogs in all of our buildings right now, but I thought it was a good conversation. We'll probably hear from Rhea later, which will be great. So thanks for being here. We love when our students come to our meetings, and we love that Clark Montessori counts coming to CPS policy committee as learning and going to school because we are civically engaged right now, and that's great. So Dan, I know you have some folks teed up for us, and just kind of wanted to get the conversation going. That's why this is on.
Perfect. So I have some experience here. Stephanie Scott has done some research this week, so she's prepared to answer some questions as well. And then we've got Margaret Hall on as well from our Student Services. I would say that's the department that has had the most experience with requests for assistance animals as well as therapy dogs in schools. So I'm not sure where we want to start here. There's ADA requirements in terms of places of public accommodation, which schools are included in terms of what assistance animals, and that's a defined term under the ADA, and persons using assistance animals must be accommodated within any public accommodation, including schools, for the use of an assistance animal. That's true regardless of whether that assistance animal might create an issue for another member of the class, for example, if you've got a student. So, sometimes folks ask, if you've got another child in the class who is allergic, let's say, to a dog or afraid of a dog, whose rights prevail? And what I always say is both rights prevail, because just like it is not at all uncommon for us to have multiple kids with disabilities in the same classroom, and we've got to make sure that both of those students or all of those students are accommodated. So it's not about whose rights prevail or anything like that. We've worked through lots of different needs of our students through the years, and again, Margaret or Stephanie, I'm glad to kick it to you if you've got additional things to say. Otherwise, glad to answer questions that we may have. You're muted, Fred.
I pushed the button. I'm sorry. No, I was saying I didn't really have anything additional to add as far as the law. You seem like you've covered that, but I think we were just more so anticipating the questions we might receive today, and somewhat trying to respond to those to be able to determine exactly how the policy committee wanted to move forward specifically. So we saw the term therapy dog. We were just kind of curious if there was a recommendation, if there was a question, and so then we could respond accordingly.
So, sorry, I dropped off the video for a second. We are all at home. Sometimes we have to quickly go take care of something at home. I definitely have a question, but I will ask Ms. Bolton to go as she has her hand up.
I'm just some clarification on this. Is this talking in terms of, it's, and I understand that we have to properly provide service dogs being in our buildings to service our students. I mean, I don't know that that's that question, is it? Or is the issue, do we want to expand that? Or is it separate than animals in the room, kind of where it seems to be teed up together? Maybe it's a separate policy. I will, as a personal testimony, had a student who in their high school experience had a cataclysmic accident, and only because of her service dog as a helper in my classroom and throughout the district was she able to return to school. So I'm a complete believer in that, and frankly think that wouldn't be a bad idea that if each of our high schools even had a dog assigned for our kids. But what's the issue? Is it that if I could have that defined for me, I'd feel better.
Appreciate it. So I think, the issue and the proposal that the young woman, I think, is making, and that was interesting enough to pique my interest, was just what you just said, that while we provide, the space for therapy dogs, service dogs, I think the idea was a therapy dog that was in the building for in the moment needs. So, having a therapy dog for a student we've put a huge renewed focus on restorative practice, right, in the district, and a huge focus on mental health, et cetera. So having a therapy dog, I know there was one school in the district where the school nurse had a therapy dog there, and sometimes students would go if they were stressed out. We have high stakes testing, which isn't always our favorite thing, but students just being stressed out. And then the thing, again, though, that I think inspired me the most was thinking in the context of COVID and students coming back and, what have students been experiencing through all of this? We all have ideas. We all know that there could be some real adverse impact. I'm not saying, again, we put a therapy dog in every school tomorrow. I'm not saying that. I just thought it was an interesting conversation of, is it worth looking at policy and creating policy that makes that possible? Or makes it possible. So I'm not really talking about service dog as much as I am straight emotional support therapy dogs, where like at Children's, for example, the dog that walks around that kids can just go hug real quick and then keep moving. And we know, especially Ms. Bolton and myself as dog lovers, look, when we get off some of these board meetings, I turn this computer off and I go hug Biggie. And it makes you feel a little better. So that's kind of it. Does that make sense? And that's how I think it's different than maybe, what we've already outlined we do. Mr. Lindy?
Yeah, Mike, I appreciate that idea. And as someone who grew up with a dog that I love very much, I relate. I think for me to have an opinion about whether we should or shouldn't have a policy that opens that up, and this might be what you're thinking too, I would just want to hear from some experts. I know the only experience I have with dogs is like what I mentioned, the dog I grew up with. I'd like to hear from somebody who is on the mental health side. I'd love to hear from, are there other schools that have had good or bad experiences with this, or even if it's not the school, like if there's research out on this, somebody who could speak to what that research is. Just to get some more context on it. I think it seems like an idea from my perspective that is absolutely worth exploring, and I would be excited to do that together.
I think that's sound, and I don't want to beef up February's agenda too much already, but I think if we could have that in February, I would like that too, to be honest. And I would like to see, and if there is data that exists. So I guess this is a quasi or assignment. If there is data that exists in districts similar to ours that have therapy dogs on staff, so to speak, full time, is there any market difference in grades and student happiness, culture, etc.? I think that's good. And also, I would put out there to my colleagues, we this was on the agenda very vaguely as therapy dogs, and we all got emailed from Amberley Village Council member Alita Kamine. I don't know if she's still on the council, but she was. That apparently her family is pretty closely connected to this issue. And her husband sits on a board that actually trains these dogs. So perhaps we could invite her husband or people she knows. She's clearly connected to it. She's in the district, friend of the district. Maybe we reach out to her and see if she could provide someone to come talk about it. Just a suggestion, and yes or no, or Ms. Bolton?
Yeah, I think that's reasonable, and I think, Margaret Hall has some insights as to whether or not this is a good use, and whether they provide that kind of support. So I think Mr. Lindy's right. We need to know more about it. My personal preference is to separate whatever policy we have from animals in the classroom and service dogs or therapy dogs. I think those are two very, very different things. So if we do talk about evolving a policy, I don't want just one policy about animals.
Yep.
Because these service dogs and therapy dogs are full partners in the classroom. They're
Yep.
not examples or specimens. So I think it'd be great. I think Mr. Lindy's right. Let's learn more. And I think we'd reach out to some of our mental health partners, and certainly our own in-house student services people could help us figure out how to proceed with this.
I think that's great. And so, Ms. Hall, would you be comfortable maybe in February we could have maybe a more robust conversation about this, and then I can reach out to Alita Kamine on that email thread that includes Ms. Bolton and Mr. Lindy to see if her and her husband could find somebody that they trust to come talk. The organization is, just so the administration knows, that she was talking to us about. It's called Circle Tail, the local organization that trains and places therapy dogs and institution dogs. They've been fostering dogs with them for about a year. Most of the dogs end up in Lakota schools. Ms. Hall, did anyone know about this group?
I actually know Circle Tail. I actually know the founder who started Circle Tail, Marlis. I worked with her, and I actually was involved with Circle Tail at its very beginning. So I know Marlis very well. I know that organization. There is a difference between service dogs and therapy dogs. Service dogs are specifically trained and qualified under ADA for service. So most people are familiar with seeing service dogs as for someone who has a disability. They're in a wheelchair, they can't reach certain things, they've had a stroke or seizures, or for people who are blind. That's probably the most common. So there is a difference between service dogs specifically trained to provide a service to and for an individual versus a therapy dog. And then animals in the classroom, to your point, Ms. Bolton, is also very different. But just so under ADA guidelines, animals for emotional supports, they don't meet the qualification under federal ADA guidelines for service under that service definition, just as a knowledge base for you guys. But I'm happy to come back in February.
That would be great. And Ms. Hall, then, since you're so closely connected, do you want to reach out to Circle Tail and get some of your contacts to come with us? Okay. So
Yeah, I can reach out to them too.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Great. Okay. Any other comments from my colleagues or council before we move on to social media? Great. All right. So the last piece of policy that Mr. Hoying referenced was looking at social media. So I will kick it over to General Counsel.
Thanks. I'll introduce this. And again, we have Tisha O'Connell, I think, still with us. She's got a busy day because we're starting, as you know, vaccinations today, which is very exciting. So she's helping to staff that as well. But it looks like she's still with us. I'm going to bring up on my screen our social media policy. This is just kind of a timely policy to review, I think. We've got, let's see, hold on a second. We have a social media policy that applies to district employees. And our proposal is to ensure that there's some community standards used on the district's social media pages. Mostly that's Facebook. As you can imagine, really over the last year, there have been lots of strong feelings, strong emotions expressed on social media, particularly on the district's Facebook page. The law on this is that because this is a sort of, there's an open ability for users of Facebook to comment on CPS posts. Facebook I'm using as the example. It may apply to other social media platforms also, but when the district puts a post out that says, mashed potatoes are going to be served on Monday, users can then comment on that post. And so our proposal is to establish some community standards on that. We have a limited ability to do that. The law is that when there is that ability for the public to comment, that the First Amendment applies, and it creates what's called a limited public forum. That essentially means that the district can, again, establish some standards as to what's posted and what's not, but those must be content neutral. So again, in the example of we post that mashed potatoes will be served in the cafeteria on Tuesday, and the first post, user posts, I love mashed potatoes, CPS's mashed potatoes are absolutely the best. And we love that because that promotes our brand and our, everything else. And then the next post that goes up is from somebody who says CPS's mashed potatoes are the worst and they are lumpy and dry and whatever. We can't take that down. We've created this sort of limited public forum, and because that would be a content restriction to say if somebody posts positively, we can't then take a post down that is negative. That's sort of the simple, but you can imagine that over the course of the last 12 months, 10 months, there have been lots of strong feelings expressed on Facebook, among other social media platforms. The idea is not to regulate the content of those posts, but rather to ensure and to put out there some standards in terms of profanity being used. We're a school district that, it's very reasonable to think some of the audiences on that social media platform are going to be children. And so prohibiting profanity from being used, prohibiting racial or ethnic comments being made on that page. These are things that in large part were, I think, a part of our policies already, but something that we think, at least, and I worked with Tisha this week, we think should be set forth in a board policy. I will say that I expected these kind of policies to be ubiquitous. I thought colleges and universities and school districts would have already, thought through these issues and included policies. They were harder to find than I thought. As usual, CPS is a little bit as Ms. Bolton said, we write our own policies. There's not a standard Neola policy on this as far as I can see. So we put together, I think, what we think of as some of the things that should be included. Again, some already were, but the social media policy only applied to employees. That was even in the title, as you'll see. So we're recommending that be broadened. And again, no content. We don't have the ability to regulate content, but we do have the ability to prohibit inappropriate language, racial or ethnic slurs, personal insults. We want to make sure that comments don't violate our anti-racism policy or policy prohibiting harassment on the basis of, again, protected classifications. I do have a line in here that says, considering CPS's social media may be accessed by school-aged audiences, comments should be age appropriate and avoid topics or content that are not suitable for children. And then again, I haven't changed the employee guidelines that were already a part of this policy. So that's our proposal. I'm glad to answer any questions. This is definitely administrative generated, not something necessarily that was requested by the board. But Tisha and I, at least, I think, believe it to be a good idea, and welcome your comments or questions.
I'll open it up to my colleagues. Mr. Lindy?
I just think this makes sense, Dan, and I that's all. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Lindy. Ms. Bolton?
Yeah, this is early in the planning, is that correct?
In terms, it's not something that's critical or mission critical. I mean, we have, if you want to look at this and digest it and look at it again next month, nothing urgent here, but something that, again, we think makes sense.
Yeah, it seems to be one of those things where the whole board would probably, Chairman Morosky, you know better than I on that. It seems like something the whole board would kind of be party to, not just when we take it there, but maybe even earlier. I have a question. The people are, even the big guys are changing the whole idea about Facebook and what you can say or not say or how it's going to be monitored. I'm not one usually that likes to see very much censorship, but I do have some questions. Do you have, and I like the list that you gave, are there issues regarding gender?
Yeah, that would be included in, I think, comments that violate board policy 2260.02, prohibition against harassment, which includes disparaging an individual on the basis of the individual's age, gender identity or expression, and then also we've got sex and sexual orientation.
Is there the whole thing about the hate speech and the issue of violence? Is any threat of violence somehow part of any of this?
I think that's an excellent suggestion. I'll have to look through to see whether it's addressed elsewhere, but it's not in this list, and I think it should be.
Those, those are actually covered by Facebook's community standards. So when you sign up, you're agreeing to not be violent or make violent comments or threats.
And that's good. And I would just say we probably needs to be repeated in our policy too. But that's good that they've got it. That's great. That's good to know. I'm just very preoccupied with also the issue of, I guess you can't do very much anymore about falsehoods or whatever. That starts to get to be real censorship. But we do seem to have an issue of truth nationwide. So I just didn't know where that was, but definitely the violence thing is good to know that that's part of Facebook. But I'd like to see it in what we do too. We might want to talk about this, Michael. We're also, everybody's a little bit, if it's going to happen, cooled down and calm, but to look at it. But I think it's great to start this. I think it's very good.
My recommendation, if my colleagues on this committee agree, would be to include this as a board matters item on February 8th. I think it's important enough. I agree with Ms. Bolton. I think it's important enough to talk about. I, too, this will not surprise anybody, have great reservations with censorship of any kind. I also understand the pragmatic need, and not even pragmatic, but just very real need. Again, we have kids that are looking on these posts, and some of the the things. I'm not a dummy or filled with Pollyanna. I mean, our kids hear a lot of things, but if we can have some modicum of control over our kids seeing nasty things, I think we should exercise that. But I do think it's a bigger conversation. So Ms. Bruckner is on the call, and Ms. Bruckner, I will ask if I can sort of preemptively include. I saw some nods. It seemed like agreement. So now's the time for Eve or Ben to tell me I'm wrong. But I would like to see that Ben's going to tell me I'm wrong. Go ahead, Ben.
No, I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm still introducing one point of challenge because I think conflict is healthy. I agree with you, Mike, that this is something that is important. I think two things are also true for me. I might size the importance a little bit smaller than you, but if you want to talk about it, power, that's great. The other thing I'm thinking about, though, is just what else is going to be happening February 8th. We will have been back in person for a week. We'll be starting to feed in some others. I think there will be a ton of public comment. I think it will be a big, epic board meeting. Maybe I'm wrong, but I don't know that there will be a ton of bandwidth for anything else. Maybe I'm wrong, but I wanted to say that and then ask you what you thought about it.
I appreciate that. I do not think you're wrong. I also think the very same could be said of every board meeting we're going to have for the rest of this year. So
that's a fabulous rejoinder.
I'm kind of a rip the Band-Aid off kind of guy. And, if it gets to the point, where we've been meeting for 7-8 hours, we can rescind. We did that. We did that with, what was it? The anti-racism that we kept moving off, Ms. Bolton. I remember when we were still meeting in person, there were a couple moments where like, well, no, or something. Either way, I agree with Ben. So, but I think, I think we'd move ahead. I think we just put it on the agenda, and if we have the time, if people do have the bandwidth, we talk about it. If not, then we move it.
That's great.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Bruckner.
Can I just add one point, Mr. Morosky, to your point of we don't like censorship, and that's an additional reason that I do recommend. We included language that specifically says that this is a limited public forum, which it indisputably is. But we often get questions from parents and community members about why we don't remove comments that are negative to CPS. A non-public entity, let's say even a private school, St. X, my alma mater, if they got comments on their Facebook page that says the potatoes are lumpy and terrible, there's really nothing stopping them from just taking those comments off and keeping on all the comments that say how great the potatoes are. That's not the case for us, and it's a worthwhile reminder to our families once in a while that we have different rules that we have to follow in terms of free speech. So to your point, I think there is I think reason to make sure that's explained in our policy.
Right. Yeah. Thanks, Dan. I appreciate it. And thank you, Ms. O'Connell, for your work on this. I think this is sound and timely. So let's hear it for Tisha O'Connell as well. Thank you so much. Any closing comments on this before we go to other business and then hearing of the public? Is there other business? I know Ms. Bolton had some, but we covered it at the beginning. Any other business? And then this would be an opportunity, Mr. Lindy, if there were policy implications you would like discussed now or at the next meeting, you can bring it up if you wanted to say, hey, could we look at therapy fish? I don't know, the next meeting.
I appreciate it, Mike. I think the big thing that I'm taking away is I want to go back through the 300 and see if I can find a couple that feel particularly resonant, and then see. I want to follow up on that. But I really appreciate it.
Right. All right, Mr. Hoying, do we have anyone signed up for hearing of the public?
We have, 6 people who I believe are all still with us. If you're ready, we'll bring them over now.
All right.
You'll remember that takes just a second.
And a reminder to everyone, you have 2 minutes. Mr. Hoying will let you know when your time is up, and I don't like to interrupt people, so if I do, I apologize ahead of time.
Chairman, are we making assignments, or will we do that after public? Or did we already kind of make them through the meeting?
So I kind of, the way I sort of have done this is, make them a log of them as we go through the meeting. But if
Super.
if you would like to reiterate right now, please feel free. Go, if you want to.
I would just suggest as an assignment for members and possibly a council to begin to review policies that might pertain mostly to the nature of the district and what guides board effort, rather than what is the guidelines or policies to guide administration and others. And then we can have a discussion about those examples that people bring back. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Ms. Bolton.
Okay, if you're ready, our first speaker is Hannah. Go ahead, Hannah.
Good morning, everyone. I am a CPS parent. My kids go to Sands Montessori. And I know you guys have been beaten with the options of with the option to return to in-person, but there's some problems. We are in a purple emergency level. There are some facts I would like to point out to you guys. Full remote has had more attendance than a hybrid. There is a new variant of COVID-19 called B112 that is all over right now. It's in 20 states in the United States, Kentucky being one of them, Indiana being one of them. We are surrounded by this new variant. It will be upon us soon. CDA is not a viable option for people with special needs or for children with special needs and IEPs. There are a lot of children who don't even want to go back in person because CDA cannot do like high school courses for them for graduation. Right now, CDA is not even answering their phone. We can't get enrolled. We can't get a message through to them to say, hey, we need to be enrolled. And as we're starting next Tuesday, what are we going to do about attendance? My teachers at our homeschool have no idea what to do for attendance. As we're purple right now, our staffing challenges we had back in November, are they not going to be the same challenges we have now? Can you at least give parents an option who need to remain remote, the ability to attend Monday and let parents work it out Tuesday through Friday with workbooks, worksheets? And last, teachers are just starting to get vaccinated in February. We already know we have to get 2 doses in order to be fully protected. Why are we going back before teachers are fully protected against a virus for kids that can't even have a vaccination because there is not one for, sorry, I don't know what that is.
That's your 2 minutes, Hannah. So if you wrap up, that'd be great.
Okay, that's fine. My last point is you're only going for 8 days in person in February. Is 8 days really worth us not being vaccinated before we return in person? And thank you for your time and letting me finish what I was saying.
No problem. Thank you.
Thanks. Our next speaker is Rhea Bender. Go ahead, Ms. Bender.
And this is the famous Rhea Bender who I was referencing earlier. So Rhea, now's your opportunity to tell us about therapy dogs.
Can you guys hear me?
Yep. Yes.
Okay. So, hi, my name's Rhea Bender. I'm a senior at Clark Montessori, and my senior project is on the effects of therapy dogs in learning environments. So, I talked to Mr. Morawski yesterday, 2 days ago about this. I'm really glad that you guys had taken the time to talk about it in your meeting and are going to keep looking at it into February. That means a lot. So, in the Clark community, from the juniors and senior class, over 75% of students who took this survey that I made have above an 8 on a stress level, which is very common in a lot of the big high schools in Cincinnati. Another thing is you guys also talked about you guys want to know data and schools that have already done this, and there's schools in Cincinnati such as, and I understand that they are private before we get into that, and they have different limits than we have. So, St. X is one of them, Moeller is one of them, the all-girls school in Kentucky, I'm Mount Notre Dame, I believe is what it is. All of these schools have had very successful results, and there is a school in Wisconsin that I would like to talk about where they had a drop in attendance, and then once they got this dog, attendance started to appear way more frequently, so people were showing up more. The amount of healthcare professionals that they had in the building went from 12 to 6, and the effects on behavioral therapy and that includes people who like get into a lot of trouble, have a hard time in school, just like have a hard time fitting in. A lot of that started to go away because when this animal was there, they felt safe. They felt that they had someone to talk to, even if they did not have anybody, like any friends in the school. And I know COVID has been a very hard time on a lot of students, me being one of them. It's been a struggle, and I feel like going back to school, I'm sorry.
No, you're fine. You're fine, Ray. If you wrap up, that would be great. We'll give you a couple seconds for it.
Okay. So I just think that like this should be a real option. We should just take a look at it, and I'd be really thankful if you guys would let me come along on the journey with you and try and work hand in hand with you guys. So thank you for taking the time to hear me.
Thank you, Rhea, for the inspiration and reaching out to me. And we would love to have you hand in hand on the journey. And I think, you dropped some data on us that we were desiring already. And it was compelling in 2 minutes. So don't be surprised if we ask you to maybe come and give us more data. I know you're doing a lot of research. So if it would be the pleasure of the committee, we may have Rhea, as we continue on this journey, to come back in an official capacity to teach us a little bit. So thank you. Mr. Hoying.
Yes, thank you. Our next speaker is Anna Cooley, followed by CFT President Julie Selleck. Go ahead, Ms. Cooley.
Hi, thank you so much. Hi, PNE community. My name is Anna Cooley. I am a parent of a student at Dater Montessori and an autistic student at Parker Woods Montessori. As someone who is immunocompromised, has a husband and a child who are both immunocompromised, I need you to clarify why you and a majority of other board members haven't allowed yourself to be held to a higher standard than the average Joe. Ms. Bolton, earlier you stated you wanted the policies to keep us in that higher level of concern. Yet you and the rest of the board, except for one, are not keeping your children, educators, and additional staff in a higher level of concern by forcing educators to return to school before their inoculation has had a chance to take effect. Given this is a policy and equity meeting, please explain how the district plans to enforce Policy 8405. Under the Occupational Health and Safety section, it states, a comprehensive occupational health and safety program shall be in place to ensure a safe and healthy work environment for personnel. The program shall comply with all pertinent federal OSHA standards as required by Ohio's PERRP. I'd also like you to explain Policy 8420.01, whereas the Board of Education directs the superintendent to establish an incident management team to develop plans in coordination with local government and law enforcement officials for both natural and man-made emergencies, in particular Section D, which states provisions to maintain continuity of education. The reason I ask is because there is no continuity for our students during our pandemic. Taking virtual and remote learning away from our students has upended many of our children's lives, and it is time the board abide by their own policies. As Ms. Bolton said, we need to determine which policies control us versus which ones lead us to determine what kind of district do we want. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Cooley. Mr. Hoying.
Thank you. Our last speaker is CFT President Julie Selleck.
Can you hear me now?
We can hear you.
I just want to start with the very beginning of the meeting before you even started into any policies. And the comment was made is through policy committee, the district would like to increase community involvement. And I am really unsure of how that is going to be done, because there's no hearing of the public, there's no dialogue that's happening. It's all just information going out, but no information coming back. I know that through CFT, I have always, and contractually, I have always been able to have a seat at the table and have and be able to speak at any meeting. And since even the policy committees and all of the other committees, some of the committees haven't even had hearing of the public for me to even make a comment. There has been no dialogue throughout this whole thing. If this meeting was in person, I would have been able to make comments throughout, but I have to just sit here until the very end when you guys are done and then try to give input on so many different things that you discussed. And sometimes we didn't even have the information ahead of time to even be able to prepare for the meetings. I know that the Health and Safety Committee last week, there was absolutely no hearing of the public. And you are public officials, and you're not little dictators who are elected to run the district in closed-door meetings. I do think that I would like to have said that policies are, when Ben asked, are policies being followed? No. For example, I remember when the policy around bullying and hostile work environments was first passed, Chris Nelms specifically said, this even includes, Rob, I don't have a timer. Chris Nelms specifically said, this policy is to include adults on adults within buildings because we have such a toxic work environment of intimidation and bullying. We tried to get some of the board's policies incorporated into our contract through multiple different negotiations, and we were always told absolutely not. Why is it that we can't, you have a policy, but we don't even have an enforcement for that policy? If we negotiate to put that in our contract, then we have a way to deal with it internally within the district. The same thing with state laws. So until there is really a true conversation about how policy is going to be implemented in our district and how it's going to be looked at, it's only going to be on paper. I do think that with, like Eve was talking about the outdoor education campus and changing it to campus, I'm not sure even what committee has been discussing this. I know it's been said, but I've never seen it really part of anything official. And so sometimes there's conversations going on that nobody even is aware of. I have a question about the sale about policy 7300 and the sale of land. And I'm glad that Eve did bring this up. Does this policy include the Board of Ed and elected officials and what their code of ethics is? Because I think that until you have that, it includes all, not just employees, but board members, you will not be able to ever stop any kind of inside deals concerning properties, especially when there's information that's revealed during executive session that only board members are entitled to hear, and no one else hears those. So I think, and I'm not saying it in a negative or positive way, but board members could give that information out and then stop a sale of something that we wanted to purchase for our district. I do want to say that until we start really having a real conversation about what is censorship and opinions around policy code 9125, and the acceptable use of internet usage. Some of these policies have been in place, but sometimes they are interpreted based on who is posting it or saying it or where it is being posted or said. And I totally understand that on anything that is a CPS Facebook page, that so it doesn't sound like censorship, is that opinions are okay, but not profanity. I don't think that all of the board members and leadership within our district understands that CPS is a public entity and not a private entity. And I'm glad that Dan brought that up, that a school like St. X, they can censor what people are saying about their school. But when you are a public entity, you don't have a brand because there are no stockholders, and people do have First Amendment rights. I think that the First Amendment rights apply, and people are allowed to have opinions for the First Amendment rights. If it is of public concern, then people are allowed to have an opinion about that. And I don't think that all the board members and leadership of the district understands that that aspect about First Amendment rights. And maybe that needs to be a matter of on the board for board matters and discussions. Maybe that is what really we should be discussing here. But to have employees have emails sent to them for sending letters to the board, and I read those letters, and there were letters in there that, I don't know if you've read them or not, they were letters that were heartfelt with hours of work put into them. And some of the letters were so compelling they would make you cry of the tragedies that teachers and families and students are living through this pandemic. And most of the people they've gotten a received email from HR, which then schools were like, does this mean we're being disciplined? The culture within this district around censorship and bullying and intimidation are, to me, outrageous. But until we really have a conversation about that, I don't know how it will change. And it really bothers me that everybody is just hiding behind these meetings where there's no dialogue. And
So, can we just wrap up in a minute?
yes.
Thanks.
So the last thing I do want to say is I am very disappointed that here we are still in purple. I'm sure that every letter that you have received about the dangers of reopening schools and how dangerous it is has been ignored. There's no research or evidence to say that it is safe to be in schools at this time. We are having conversations with the district, but I want to have a conversation with the board, which I have not been able to have. And I would like to see if I can set up a meeting with the board to discuss some of these issues so that we can come to a resolution, because some of our policies are sometimes so ignored to the point where it's sounding as if the district's becoming a dictatorship. And I'm sorry that some of this is hard for you to hear, but it is something that we do need to discuss.
Thank you, Ms. Sellers. I would like, before we close, before we adjourn the meeting, I'd just like for the members of the public who are not familiar with our meetings or our contract with the Cincinnati Federation of Teachers, Ms. Sellers does not have a time limit, which is why she was able to talk beyond the 2 minutes. So without any further ado, I'm going to adjourn this meeting. I appreciate everybody's time today. We went a little over, but I think our conversation was really good. And if I may, Mr. Lindy and Ms. Bolton, based on today's conversation, I am really excited to have two policy wonks who really want to dig into policy and use policy to make this district better on this committee. Not that I didn't have that before, but this is was a great conversation. So unless anyone has anything else.
Stay safe.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you, team. Dan and Stephanie, nice to meet you.
Great.
Bye.
Meeting adjourned. See y'all.
Bye.
Bye.